You know that triangle that photographers and videographers talk about all the time? Let's discuss it. I'm Nicholas Clayton Lee and welcome to Director Discovery. I'm obviously talking about the exposure triangle. But when we're talking about exposure, we're always thinking either the image is too bright or too dark. But there's obviously more to that. And the exposure triangle helps us understand how to make an image perfectly exposed and also maybe make an image more grainy or just certain parts of the image really clear and the rest very blurry. And what we call that is called bokeh. Or make the whole image very clear. Or maybe there's somebody running really fast and you want to catch them at the perfect moment where they look like they're just stopped in that moment, or they look like they're running super fast and everything is just blurred out. Understanding the exposure triangle can help you get all of those results. So the exposure triangle consists of three things that you have to know: the aperture, the shutter speed, and the ISO, or ISO for some people to say it quickly. Once you understand all these three things, you can pretty much take pictures any way you want because these never change and they never will. Once you understand it, you're good. Anyway, I'm going to be using my X-T4 to show you guys how to adjust this because everything is dials on the X-T4, which is really good. We start off with the aperture, and aperture is always found on the lens. As you guys can see, this is a 23mm f1.4 lens, and you can just see it goes from 1.4 to f16, and the A stands for auto. So the idea of this is as the number gets higher, the hole in the lens gets smaller, resulting in less light being allowed into the lens. So as you guys can see, I'm at 1.4 and everything is really bright. But as I turn it and it goes to f16, everything's really dark because it's resulting in less light being allowed into your lens. So in order to compensate how dark this image is, we use both the shutter speed and the ISO so that this image will become brighter. So you may ask, why would you even use a higher aperture? The reason is because once you use a higher aperture, everything in that image will be very, very sharp. And as the number gets lower, you actually open up the lens and you let more light in, there's only certain parts of the image it will focus on that will be really sharp. Everything else will be very dreamy and you'll see those bokeh balls at the back. And it really depends on what you're shooting and how your style is that you have to change the aperture. So for example, if you're doing landscape and you want everything in focus, so you pretty much want to turn it into at least an f8 so that a lot of things are in focus. I know some product photographers, they would turn it as high as possible. Some lenses will go to f22 and they would want that because they want everything in the image to be very sharp. Whereas some people like taking photos at only f1.4 for this lens, or some lens can even handle even wider open, or like, in other words, like the number even lower. And they would just want certain parts of that image to be very sharp and everything else to be very, very dreamy. So think of aperture as the quantity of light going through your lens. So the lower the number, the wider the hole, the more light it can come in. The bigger the number, the smaller the hole, the less light it will come in. Easy. Next, let's talk about shutter speed. The shutter speed is pretty much how fast the camera is actually taking the photo. So as you guys can see, this is 1/8000th of a second. My camera's not on. You hear how fast that is? And you can slow it down to maybe 1/60th of a second. Not as fast, right? And you can even slow it down to a few minutes. This is only 1/2 of a second. So it's a lot slower. And these you can actually play around with and adjust. So pretty much the faster the shutter speed, the less light it will allow to come in. So right now, I'm at 1/500th of a second. And you can see it's pretty dark now. I'm at 1/15th of a second, so it gets pretty bright. This is how I think about it. Imagine there are two doors trying to close like this, like a gate. The faster the number, 1/8000th, it will close really fast, right? But with the lower the number, it will slow down in closing. And the slower it is, the more light can come in. So, and then this results in you being allowed to get those shots where they're like long exposure shots, and those can last for like minutes. And you can take your time and write your whole name with a light, and that's how those shots are done. So it really depends on what your shot is, and you have to adjust your camera setting depending on the shot you want to take. So the ISO pretty much tells your camera how sensitive it is to light. And unlike the others, the lower the number, the less light it'll come in. The higher the number, the more light it'll come in. And you may think, oh, why not you just keep it as really high? But the result is, if you leave the number at, say for this camera, it can go all the way up to 12,800. The footages will be very grainy, and in post you can only remove so much grain. A lot of people tend to not want that because it gets to become very digital and the footage won't actually look that nice, unless that is a style. But I personally don't recommend you shooting at such high ISO. Unless you really do have to. Even if it's in the dark, you would want to see maybe your image of what you're shooting, and you would turn up some ISO to make the footage a bit grainy, which is okay, but if possible, try to keep your ISO as low as possible. So as a photographer, you really have to find a way to juggle all three of these to get the best image possible for yourself, depending on what you're shooting. So there is no right way to do this. There are recommended ways, but there is no one correct way to do this. Some people's hand might be very stable and they don't have to go at such high shutter speed so that they can just get more light in. That could be a benefit. Everyone is different, and some people might shake a lot and they have to adjust it because to get a higher shutter speed and everything. So it really depends on the person. So this is a very good beginner's chart to give you a recommendation of how you can adjust and give you just an idea of what you could do. And if you're trying to get somebody that's like running and they're like moving really quickly, you want a higher shutter speed so you can stop them at the exact spot. And it also really depends on how you want your background. If you want everything to be really sharp, or if you want a blurry background, it really depends on how you want, and you can play with these things. So something I'd recommend for beginners is to keep either the shutter speed or the aperture in auto so that the camera itself can compensate for you. So for example, if I have the aperture on auto, no matter how much I adjust the ISO or the shutter speed, you can see the f-stop constantly changes to compensate so that you have a perfect exposure. While if I keep the shutter speed on auto and adjust the f-stop, as you can see, the SS is actually changing its number by itself. So as a beginner, I'd start off with everything as auto, obviously, and then I'd start off by having two of the things auto, and then play with that one, maybe just play with the ISO and see if that image is what you like, and then eventually have just one of them in auto, and then you'll learn yourself and from experience, and then eventually you'll be all manual and you'll get exactly what you want just shooting on manual. This is a process, it takes time, but it's actually really fun once you get a hold of it. And this is just the basics of it all. There's still a lot more to learn about taking photos and camera, but I hope this helps, and please let me know what you guys think, and I'll see you guys next time.